Rick, can you give me some background to what the situation was on Hamilton Mountain?
Yeah, certainly, Mike. We had a situation on Hamilton Mountain where many churches had been developed over the 50s, the end of the 50s and 1960s, when there was a boom at that time. By the time the end of the 90s came, those churches were in pretty serious decline. They had seen attendance go from over 2,000 people in worship on a Sunday morning down to only 600. And so we had 6 churches that were really struggling in many ways. They were struggling with their membership. They were struggling attracting young people. They were struggling financially. There was $500,000 worth of debt spread over those 6 churches. And even though it was in a suburban area where there had been growth, the growth had not been favorable to the Anglican Church. There had been a lot of Roman Catholic schools built, and so the ethnic mix wasn't quite what it had been. And so they were in pretty desperate straits. And one of the real sad things about the situation is that everyone was suffering alone. The churches rarely spoke to each other. They were kind of embarrassed about the situation that they were in. So they were carrying those burdens alone.
Sounds familiar, but also sounds very challenging. So how did you approach it?
Well, it was the bishop and the synod that took action. And they knew what was happening there, and they planned an intervention whereby they created a mandate. The bishop basically said, I want the churches on Hamilton Mountain to spend a year studying together, looking at how they can better do ministry. Don't think about your problems. Think about how you'd like to do ministry in the future together, and look at other ways of perhaps structuring yourself so that you can actually be more effective in delivering that kind of ministry. We did a number of things. We did history nights. We did intensive demographic studies of the neighborhood, not only of the churches themselves, the parishes, but also of the neighborhoods. And we ended up with a special kind of a meeting at the end of about a year. And the special meeting was to bring together as many people from all of the parishes together at a meeting where they could talk about the things that they were most passionate about. So what we found was that people were talking in groups about everything from how to do better prayer ministry, how to do better pastoral care training, and how to sponsor a refugee. There was a group that talked about, can we restructure ourselves to do something more effective? There was a communications group. There was a youth ministry group. And these were all groups that spontaneously came together from the various churches. And people said, wow, I didn't realize there were other people on the mountain that felt this way about that subject. I thought I was alone, or I thought our church was the only one that was interested in that. And so these networks began to occur between the people from all the different churches. And at the end of that weekend, we had come together to a vision that said, we would be much better at Anglican ministry if we thought as one parish, if we worked towards functioning like one parish, with a common mission, with team clergy, with common administration. And that was the overriding vision that came out of that weekend. And after a year of working together, we decided that we really did like this way of doing things, and we covenanted together. About a year after the original meeting, the bishop came back. We had another group worship, and we all covenanted that we would become, as it were, a one parish, even though we kept our own identities. We became one parish called the Hamilton Mountain Ministry. I'm pleased to tell you that those ministries continue. From a clergy person's point of view, it's wonderful not to have to worry about doing everything. You can focus on the things that you're interested in, and there are other clergy that are interested in different things. So we have one clergy person who's really interested in family and youth ministry. We have another clergy person who is interested in health and wholeness, and there's a parish nurse there working with that person. There's another person whose youth is the speciality for this person. And so the clergy are free to do the kinds of ministries that they feel passionate about, and they don't have to feel that they have to be all things for all people. And the various parishes work together to do programming as well. So one parish runs an alpha program and everybody sends people to it. Another one runs Living the Questions program, which is at the other end of the spectrum, as it were, and people go to that. So it's a very exciting way to be in ministry with others.
It's a tough thing to do if you're in a parish to decide you're going to disestablish or join with another. How did you deal with all the issues that there must have been around that, particularly for the parishioners?
I would say that the most important thing for everyone was to have a sense of hope and vision for the future. People will do extraordinary things if they believe that it will be for the better in the future. So one of the things that I hope you understand is that we had a vision for the future together. There was some hope, there was some passion for ministry. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that people needed to begin to realize that the church was the people and not the building. I remember one meeting at one of the churches that in fact did leave the building and merged with another congregation. There was a woman there who had been part of the parish for years. She had seen people buried out of that church. She had seen people married out of that church in her family. It was a very precious place for her. And at one point she said, "Oh, I think that the church really is the people and it's not the building. It's the big C church, not the little C church." So when people realized that maintenance was a burden and mission was going to be something interesting to move towards, then people could begin to think about letting go. It's not easy. I mean, there's a grief process that's involved. We had to be very caring with one another during the whole process. There was an interesting moment when one of the congregations that went to another congregation, the wardens, after they'd been in the congregation for over 2 months, got up to thank the host congregation for making them all feel so welcome. And he said, "You know, not once has anyone said to one of our people, 'You're sitting in my pew.'" You know, and that's so important, yeah. Is that the people who were welcoming the other people in really understood how difficult it was probably going to be and made space, as it were, for them to come in.
It's quite striking that much of the decision-making comes, and hard decision-making, comes from the people who are sitting in the pews, as opposed to being directed by a bishop that this will close.
There needs to be open communication. Everybody needs to know everything that's going on. And reasonable people committed to the Anglican Church and its mission, I have seen make reasonable and courageous decisions.
Quite often what we hear is, well, we don't let God work in us. We don't deal with the spiritual issues around it. How did you deal with, how did the Spirit work through you people?
There were many times during the process when we felt there were breakthroughs of the Spirit, as it were, guiding the process or guiding the individuals. And for us, particularly at the big event where we all came together, we suddenly realized that we were all together and we had been in the desert together. We had been really at our wits' end, in despair, wandering, lost, feeling very, very depressed. And suddenly, out of that event, it's like the Spirit moved and people caught a vision of the Promised Land. And we had a direction that we weren't there. We knew we weren't there. And we had to keep walking. But now we were walking together with some purpose to a future. So it was really that kind of wilderness spiritual experience of being, something had to die. We had, the old ways of doing things had to die so that something new could emerge.
So a real Easter moment.
It was, yeah. We came increasingly to identify with that whole Lenten journey let your church be the wheat which bears its fruit in dying. That became almost a mantra for us and was used at the closing services of the churches that did decide to close and then either move or amalgamate together. And so there was a whole spiritual resurrection. In fact, the new church is called, the amalgamated church is called the Church of the Resurrection. The bishop chose the name, but we consider ourselves to be resurrection people. Talk to those people today. They say, yes, we're the resurrection people. And there's a whole new vitality, which has increased the membership of the church. The church has doubled in size in the last 6 years because there's an excitement and a spirit there. And the other churches are also doing much better. And so, yes, there's a spiritual component to all this. Absolutely.
Rick, I want to thank you so much for sharing what has happened in the Niagara Diocese. It gives us a lot of hope. We have a lot of similar situations. So thank you
you're
so
welcome.
much for being here.
It's great to be able to tell the story.
Good.